Hey everyone, this is Daniel, and in today's video, we're going to talk about Power Apps Components Library. And I'll walk you through the whole thing, is where these components library are, how do I go and add components over there, how do I go and use those components in my regular Power Apps, and we'll even walk through building one, which is a very important one, the navigation component. And I'll share some tips and tricks over there where how I can build this navigation component, but yet use an external data source such as a SharePoint list. I'll share all those secrets with you. So stick around, it'll be fun. But first, here's my intro video. So let's get started. First, let's just spend a few minutes getting comfortable with the whole concept of components library as far as where it is, how do I go there, how do I start building one, and how do I even get that into the Power Apps side. Let's just get comfortable with that. So here I am in my Power Apps canvas. I've selected an environment of my choice, and that's a key one because your components library is tied to that environment. So you need to plan ahead for that. Now I go into my apps, and by default, it's the apps tab that is selected. But right next to it, to its right, you will see the components library. Now when you go over here, if this is the first time you're doing it, then this is what you will see. It'll say, you don't have any component libraries over here, which is fine. But now you just kind of know exactly this is where you go. So when you start building a components library, it almost has the same feel to it as if you're building an app by itself, because let's face it, that's what you're doing. You're building components in Power Apps Canvas Studio as if you're building apps. So both of these buttons over here are the exact same. On the top left, it says plus new component library. On the bottom right, it's on the center, it says create component library. Exact same thing. So I'll go and create on that, and I'll just say live demo of components library, and I'll go and create it. And then now it behaves as if it's going out into a Power Apps Canvas Studio. But when it does, it'll show you this one little difference, which I'll point out to you in just a minute. And see, right here, the first thing that it has done is it has selected the Components tab. It hasn't done the screens. That's the key difference, which I've always noticed when you go ahead and put this in directly at the first time, right? So I'll just pretend that I'm starting to build some components library over here. I'll go ahead and actually add a button. I'll go ahead and just do something. And I have some demos I'll show you, but I just want to add some controls over here just to show that we did something. And then next, I'll rename this component, and I'll call this as live demo 1. And we'll go ahead and now save it. So I come into my file, and I'll go ahead and save it. And once it is saved, we'll go out of it, outside, and now you'll see your first component item in the components library. So I'll go and close this, and we'll go out, and voila, right here you will see the live demo of components library. So that's the very first one that you've created, and it's telling me that it is editable for you. And here you come and behave it as the exact same way, because you are going to share this components library, and in that library there's a bunch of components. If you want to share this with other users who are going to reuse it again and again, you've got to share that as well, because remember, it behaves like an app. So in order for other people to access those components in this component library, you've got to share that with them. So keep that in mind, all right? So what I'll do now is I'll go ahead and show you one which is already finished, and I'll show you how we can make some changes there. So here is the one that I've completed, all right? It's a demo one that I built, and I've gone ahead and done the exact same thing, went ahead and built it. What we're going to do now is we're going to go into this app that I'm just creating, okay? Fresh app, nothing fancy about this, just went and basically created the app and gave a name. And now I'm going to go ahead and call all the components in this components library app. So for that, I'll come in and I'll have to click on this plus, which is the insert. When I click on it, this is what you see over here. And as you can see, I'm not seeing anything to do with components or components library. What I do see way at the bottom is an option called Get More Components. So when I click on Get More Components, I see something called Navigation. And in Navigation, I have two components. And that's exactly what's happened, because when I go to my left tab, this is the one in my components library. I have something called navigation. And when I open up navigation, in there, you will actually see two components, the same ones that we saw, the header and the footer. So we'll go in and we'll just take a look at that just to confirm. So it's loading. We're getting in over here. And as you can see, that's all we've got. We've got the header and the footer. So when I come back in, that's exactly what you see. The components library has something called navigation, and there's the header and the footer. Now I want to show you this little interesting piece. For now, I'll just go and select header, okay? Now I'm going to do and import that. Now on the left side, you will see library components. Check this out though, okay? I go back now into my tree view. When I go to screens, If I click on components, I don't see the component from the library component over here. This section, which we're so used to in doing components, this is only for app level components. You don't see the library ones over here. To see the library ones, you got to go back again to your insert, and this is the place where you go and see library components. So that's the first thing. Now notice we went ahead and grabbed that one component from that component library. But if I were to go back and click on get more components again, it remembers that, hey, from this navigation, you've already gone ahead and pulled one, you only have one remaining. So I like that it's kind of keeping a count of how many you already have. That way you don't go and get any duplicates. So for the sake of this demo, I'll go ahead and grab that import as well. And now we've got both of them. And that's basically it from this point, is that you were able to go ahead and grab the library components, create this library component because it was missing. And now I've gone ahead and created these two over here. Now, in my previous video where I talked about building a smart navigation menu, I had shown how to build this header and footer components over there. Granted, over there I did an app level component, but the steps are the exact same. So you can replicate that in the component library as well. Still, I'll show it to you while you're here. This is what it is. It's the header component in the component library, and then there's a footer component in the component library. And I went ahead and did all of the same things which I've shown in that video. So go check that one out. I went ahead and added all of these properties to go ahead and dynamically change all of these things inside the app. And this is basically what it is. So when I now go to one of my finished apps, which is right here, I already did the exact same thing. I went and got to the get more components, and I went ahead and called the header and the footer, which is why I don't see anything right now over here, right? That's why it is. And this is what it looks like. So when I go now into my tree view, as you can see, I've got two screens. I've got all this fancy looking design, but at the end of the day, there are just two components. This is the component over here for the home screen, for the footer one. This is the component over there for the header one. And it looks pretty nice. And as you can see, all the properties showed up. I was able to change all of that. This is how the concept of component library works. Keeping in mind, I go to the tree view, and that's where I see it. I do not see it over here. Now, while we are here, let me show you a few other things. When I go back to my screens and I go and take a look at these two components, if I were to click on any of the ellipses for any of the components, I see something called as edit component. If I click on the edit component, this option shows up. And let's actually read it. What it's saying that if you want to edit this component, you can either create a local copy or you can go ahead and do it in your component library. And over there, this link just takes you to a Microsoft doc. It actually doesn't take you to the component library. That is something that you have to do by yourself, is you basically have to go back to your component library, and there you make the changes and you'll push that out. And I'll show you that in a second. But just to keep in mind though, is that when you're here, if you create this copy, that copy gets automatically added to this app level component. And any change that you make over here will not get saved in your component library. The other way also is the same. You make any changes in that component library for that header component, it doesn't sync up over here. The two of them are completely different. So keep that in mind, all right? That these are two separate things over there. And you can actually just tell by where they're located. So I'll go ahead and delete this one off because I don't need this right now. But what we'll do is now we'll focus our attention on the component library because there's some changes I want to show. So let's pretend now we are in the component library, and over here, I'm just going to do something, all right? I'll just come to my header, my place over here. I'll go ahead and change the font size to say 22, all right? Then I'll go ahead and save it. And then I'm going to save it, and I'll go ahead and publish it. And then I'm still here inside my component library section making the change. But I made a change. Well, how do I go ahead and see that change in the actual app? So now when I go back to my app, there's something that I can do. And it's kind of hidden, but here's how it is. Quick recap, we did a change to that the component in the component library. Now, if I want to go ahead and get that change, you've got to go into this insert section. And the moment you're doing the insert section, by the search, you see this ellipsis. That's where you go and click on it, and you see check for updates. Moment you do the check for updates, over here, it goes ahead and checks the component library to just do a quick check. Say, hey, was any changes done over there? Yep, it did find a change, and now it's going and giving that information over here. And it's pretty neat because it's telling me from which component library it came to, which in our case is only one, which is navigation. So in navigation, it was able to go ahead and grab one of them. It even keeps me a timestamp of when the change happened. That's pretty neat. And I'll go ahead and click on update, and then the change came in. All right, so it was pretty simple. In fact, it was just a font size, so it didn't show something very significant, but we'll make it a little bit more prominent. All right, let's go and have a little bit more fun. I'll come in there for that header one. I'll go ahead and drop now another, actually, I'll just take this icon that I have, home icon. I'll do a Control-C, Control-V, and I'll just go ahead and drop that to the right, just have fun with it. and I'll go ahead and put in, change the icon to just say something else. And it might look a little different, but I just want to prove a point. So I'll come back now to my file, I'll save it, I'll go ahead and publish it. And once it's published, we'll go back to our app over here, and then we'll go and do a check. So remember, if you are on the tree view, here next to the search, you won't see that horizontal ellipsis or that three icons. You have to go to the insert, and now near the search, you see that, and I'll click on check for updates, and it does find something, the recent timestamp. And I can go and click on it, I can unselect it, I can select it, and I'll click on the update, and then immediately you will see that it shows up over here. Now I made it a little bit responsive, which is why it's showing that design, but you get the point that this is how it's working over here, right? So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and we'll focus on building that navigation component that I promised. And over here, my logic is that the items of that navigation menu are going to come from an external data source, which in my case is the SharePoint list. But I don't want to put the SharePoint or the data source tied inside that component in the component library, because I want the flexibility to assign it to any data source. All I want is that shell component with all the design. I should be able to put it any data source. So here's some tricks I'm going to show you of how I did it. And the important one is I selected the navigation and the ability to even do a click, because that was the one that I found the most challenging, and I want to share that with you. So here's my SharePoint site, and in my SharePoint site, I have a list called communities. And over here in my list, all I basically put in is the title column, which is the name of the community, and then the URL, just these two things over here, all right? And I've gone ahead and put in all the Power Apps. Basically, all the communities are Power Platform, SharePoint, so on and so forth, Teams, Microsoft Forms, and I've gotten their URLs. The trick is at the end, I should be able to click the navigation menu, and when I click on it, it should be able to open up this URL. So what we'll do now is we'll go back into our component library. And here I'm going to go in, and now we're going to add a new component. So I'll call this new component, I'll click on the new, and over there, I'll just call this as our vertical navigation, all right? That's what it is going to be. And I'll go ahead and now do some changes. Right there, I'll say that, okay, the width is good enough for that, but I'll go ahead and change this to, well, actually, I want to change the width, though. I'll go ahead and put that to say about 200 for now, and I'll change that. So basically, it's going to be a vertical navigation, so I'm pretty happy with that. That's what I'm going to stick to. All right, so the first trick I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and now put in an items. Here's the thing. I want to now go ahead and put in just a shell of what that list will look like, wherever the data source is coming in. And my data source literally has three things over there. It has an ID column, it has the title, and it has a URL. So I'm going to kind of replicate a table over here, but it's very important that you keep that naming convention the exact same. And let me show you what that means. So selected on the component name, I come to component custom properties, and the custom properties, I'll go ahead and call this one as, say, just the VNC, which stands for the vertical navigation component, gallery items. And in my input for property type, I'll leave it as input as is, but over here, I'll select table. And I'm going to click on create, right? And then in the table, when I go and actually click on it, just to make sure everything is good. But now in my vertical navigation section, I'll click on that one and I'll come over here and I should be able to see the VNC gallery items, the same one that I added. Here, I'm going to put in, using this example that I've done, I'm going to actually put in some data. So watch this. I'll actually type this in. I'll make that a little bit bigger and I'm going to call that as table. So it'll be the table design. I'll go ahead and open and close the brackets. That's just my style of how I do it. Next, I'll go ahead and open and close the curly brackets as well. All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and say ID. I'll type in ID, comma 1. Then I'll also go ahead and say title. And in my title, I'll basically try to replicate the exact same thing I have here. I'll go and just say Power Apps. So I'm going to come back into my components library and I'll say Power Apps. And then the last one was URL. And that's also going to be double quotes. And I'll go and grab that URL. So let me just actually click on this one. And I'll go and click on this item. Just make sure I grab the correct URL. Might have to do this edit as well. Cool, got that. Come back into our Power Apps. And I'll put that into my double quotes. And there you go. That's something I've created. Make sure that I don't have any errors. The errors are all good. And now I'll go ahead and now add that in as a gallery item. So what I'll have to do is pretty simple. I'll come back inside and I'll go ahead and actually add a gallery. And in my gallery, I'll go ahead and make the change. The change is basically what I want is just the title. That's all I need right now. So I'll just select that as a title. That's it. and I'll fill it up properly, do it all nicely so it looks that way. And then here, I'll change that name also a little bit. I'll just call it as VNC Gallery. And in my gallery, for its items, I'll go ahead and actually give the name. So VNC Gallery. No, it's actually the vertical. It's vertical navigation component. That's this name over here, navigation component dot, and then after that I have to go ahead and give it that one property item that I have. I'll go ahead and create that, and it will already start populating it, and there you go, that's right there. All right, next is a couple of important things. I want to go ahead and get rid of this one. All right, so I'll take rid of that, and then here you can go ahead and make this all, you know, fancy as you want. You can go ahead and put that in the center. You can go ahead and change, you know, some other design. Just make it look, you know, however you feel fit. I might have to actually increase it because it is Power Apps, so I can do it however I want this way. Keep that in mind. Make it as fancy as you want. What I'll do is I'll actually change that name to title. I don't need the separator, so I'll remove that. But what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and actually add a button. So in my button, I'm going to select it, and see, you got to make sure that it comes inside the gallery. So I'll go ahead and delete this one. Select an item inside the gallery. Let's click title. I've added button. There you go. The button shows up inside it. And now I'll just make sure that the button is correctly placed all the way in, all that jazz. And I'm going to design the button a little bit. So I don't like the radius, so I'll make that as 0. I will actually take out any of the ones that I want. Because our point is we need to hide this button. People should not even know that there is a button over there. So that's why I'll even take out the text. I'll go into the home field. I'll remove out this fill. So right now we literally don't know what there is a button. But there's one catch though, is if you actually select your Alt, and if I hover my mouse over that, you see this button thing. So I got to remove that as well. So I'm going to go to my button, and if you go to the right, it's the hover color. So when I click on the hover color, it shows up over there, or you can just click on this item there, either one of them. I just want the hover fill to be all blank. So I'll take that off. Now if I do a test, I click on Alt again, and if I hover over there, just to make sure I'm doing it correctly, if I hover over there, that effect is gone. So now we literally don't know that there is a button. But on the button, I want you to add this formula. So on the button, in its on select, all right, on select, change this and put in launch. And inside the launch, you've got 3 options: title, URL, ID. Remember that data that we just put in the shell table? This one, go ahead and change it to this URL. And honestly, we are done over here. So now watch, okay? I'm going to first do the same things. I'm going to go and save it. Because remember, we are in the components library. This is not the app. This is the components library. So we saved it. We've gone ahead and published it. Now let's focus our attention back over here inside the app. I want to add this design. So I'll go back into my components library. I'll go into get more components. And I'll do a refresh. Oh, it went ahead and picked up the new one. Sweet. Grab it. Import. And it'll show up over here. And I can just go ahead and select it. The moment I select it, it goes ahead and populates that. So it puts it over here. And then after that, you can go and do however design that you want. So I'll go ahead and put this down that way. And you can make it as responsive as a design that you want, you know, make it nice and jazzy. But I'll just do it for this demo sake. All right, so what it did was it went ahead and pulled that data that we had. We're going to override this data with our SharePoint list one. So for that, first, I got to go and make that connection. So I'll go over here to my data sources. I'll search for SharePoint. I'll click on the SharePoint, select my data source. And that one was coming from something called as Power Platform Team. So I just make sure I do that. It is the Power Platform Team. The list was called Communities. And there you go. Here's our data connection. But we're not done yet. What we got to do is we got to go back into our vertical navigation. And in our vertical navigation, we've got to go ahead and find that property that we added, which is the VNC Gallery Items. That VNC Gallery Items was the one we just added. Here, we got to override this. So I'm going to take this one out. And I'm going to now put in the data source that we added, which was the communities, right? So I click on communities, and there, see, it automatically went ahead and populated everything. But it's gone ahead and even taken care of the URL. So check this out. Now, if I go ahead and click on the play, it's given me all this information. But if I were to click, the moment I hover my mouse over it, it's put as if there's a link over there. Because remember, there's a hidden button. Now, when I click on it, voila, it went ahead and opened up another tab, and it launched the URL. Just like you would want it from the navigation. You see what awesomeness we just completed over here? Because now we are not putting in the data source inside the component, inside the library component. We tricked it. We told it what the column names would be, like the ID, the title, and the URL, because it matched what was the SharePoint list we had. When we came ahead and got the component inside the app, there we went ahead and attached the components, attached the data source, and we just tricked it. We came in here, we went to the items gallery, we replaced it, and it went and automatically populated. We were able to successfully create our navigation control using components library. Wasn't that awesome? Hopefully this gave you a good overview of how to go ahead and use the components library. Plus I shared that trick of how to create your navigation in components library, which you can reuse across any apps in that environment. Just remember to match those title columns and the URL and ID the exact same way. So I highly recommend that you start getting used to the components library. And if you've already got components inside the app, plan on migrating them over into the components library, or at least the new ones that you're going to build them in the components library. So hopefully this was helpful. And as always, keep using Power Apps. Hey everyone, hopefully you found this video useful. And if you did, can you help me help you? Can you subscribe to this YouTube channel? Because remember, I provide fresh content on a weekly basis and it's 100% free. So if you have subscribed, thank you so much and pass the word. But if you haven't, subscribe, click on the bell notification and let the learning begin.